Hello everyone. Let me start by asking you a question. Have you ever walked into a room and suddenly forgotten why you went there? For example, this actually happens to me quite a lot. I might walk into another room to get something, but when I arrive, I suddenly stop and think, wait, what's what I going to do? For a moment, I just stand there and trying to remember. It feels a little strange and sometimes even a little frustrating. But the interesting thing is that this experience is actually really common. Many people have experienced the same thing in their daily lives. So today I want to talk about this strange but common experience that happens when people walk through a doorway. This experience is called the doorway effect, and it shows how our brain organizes memories based on location and events. In this presentation, I will explain three things. First, what the doorway effect is. Second, why the doorway effect happens in our brain. And third, some example of how it appears in everyday life. First, let's talk about what the doorway effect is. The doorway effect refers to a situation where people forget what they were about to do after entering a new room. For example, you may walk into the kitchen because you want a glass of water, but then when you arrive in the kitchen, you suddenly forget what you went there for. You may stand there for a moment and try to remember your original purpose. Scientists and psychologists call this phenomenon the doorway effect. This happens because the brain organizes memories and experience into different events. When we move from one place to another, especially through a doorway, the brain sometimes treats it as the end of one event and the beginning of the other. Because of this change, the thought that we had before entering the room may disappear from our working memory. As you can see in this image, the person walks into a room and suddenly looks confused. The picture represents a situation that many people experience in everyday life when they forget their original purpose after entering a new space. Now, let's look at why the doorway effect happens. To understand this, we need to think about how the brain organizes information. Our brain does not store memories randomly. Instead, it organizes experience into different events. For example, your brain may separate experience like being in your bedroom or being in your kitchen or even being outside of the house. A doorway often acts like a boundary between those different events. When we walk through a doorway, our brain organizes that we are entering a new environment. Because of the change in environment, the brain sometimes resets the context of what we were thinking before. In other words, the brain starts focusing on the new situation instead of the previous thought. This is why the thought we had before entering the room may suddenly disappear. If we look at this diagram, it shows what happens before, during, and after someone walks through a doorway. Before crossing the doorway, the brain still holds the original thought. When the person crosses the doorway, the brain begins to process the new environment. After entering the new room, the brain may treat it as a new event, and the previous thought can be forgotten. This process explains why the doorway effect happens. Now let's look at some everyday examples of the doorway effect. The first example is going to another room to get an item but forgetting what you wanted to when you arrive. For instance, you might walk to the kitchen to get a snack, but once you arrive, you suddenly cannot remember what you wanted. The second example is going somewhere but forgetting the purpose of going there. For example, you might walk toward another part of the house, but halfway through or after arriving, you suddenly wonder why you went there in the first place. The third example is picking up your phone and forgetting what you wanted to do. Sometimes we pick up our phones to send a message or search for something, but after unlocking the phone, we suddenly forget our original intentions. These situations happens to many people in the daily life. They are small moments, but they show how our brain processes information and change focus when our environment changes. In conclusion, the doorway effect explains why people sometimes forget information when they move into a new space. This happens because the brain organizes memories based on location and events. When we walk through a doorway, the brain may treat it as the beginning of new events, which can cause us to forget the thought we had before. So today I talk about three main points. First, what the doorway effect is. Second, why it happens in our brain. And third, how it appears in everyday life. So the next time you walk into a new room and suddenly forget why you went there, don't worry. It does not mean you have bad memory. It's simply because doorway effect. Thank you.